I'll now be inviting our colleague from Sri Lanka. She's joining us virtually, Dilrukshi Handunnetti. She's an international award-winning investigative journalist and lawyer from Sri Lanka. She will obviously talk about the challenges of reporting from conflict zones, as well as the kind of political and economic crises that the country has been going through and the challenges that it has thrown up for the people who are reporting on it. So I welcome Dilrukshi.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. But I think after Daniel, there is very little to be said about Sri Lanka, perhaps. And he unpacked most of our countries in the region and why we are all looking very red. And as you all know, Sri Lanka does look very red. But I just listening to all four speakers, I felt that perhaps I should think about, explaining the situation in Sri Lanka, not only for reporters, not only for journalists who are covering the current crisis, but about the human rights situation in general as well. There was a popular uprising in April when Sri Lanka's escalating financial crisis spilled onto the streets of Colombo and then spread to elsewhere, um, which also was reflective of a very deep-rooted political crisis, a human rights crisis. Many crises were represented, but I would think that we were recognizing that Sri Lanka for long has been tolerating many things, and this includes probably the region's largest nepotism project. We all of you know that Sri Lanka was we until recently we had a massive family rule, and the protesters were able to um, get the former president Gotabaya Rajapaksa to resign as a result of the protests. And then there was Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa who also stepped down. And the other Rajapakshas who were also holding office, different portfolios and in power in different forms, were all forced to step down from their duties at that time. But if you thought that Sri Lanka was going to rewrite history and to have a different story to tell, um, I think we can acknowledge the fact that we are not telling that different story. Um, the Sri Lankan foreign minister was speaking, addressing the UN General Assembly just a few days ago, and he was speaking about freedom of expression and how important it is to have freedom of expression protected in Sri Lanka. We do know that we have leaders who speak about rights, who speak to the international community, and there is a separate lingo when you speak about the rights-based approach when you speak at such fora. But at the same time, on the same day, around the same time, 84 activists from Socialist Youth Forum were arrested. And to date, from the data I have, over 3,800 people have been arrested, all of them associated with the recent protests. And at least one third of those people are still under detention. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what Sri Lanka is. And clearly, these arbitrary arrests, the harassment, continuous harassment of journalists, artists, activists associated with the protests and months-long protests is an ongoing thing for Sri Lanka. The global condemnation has not done much to change the situation here. The cracking down on dissent still continues, and there is a clear witch hunt of the protesters, and people actually live in fear. People are scared to speak freely, express themselves, or to speak, share even posts on social media, because there is a lot of surveillance which people would not even want to acknowledge publicly anymore for the fear of reprisal. The public's demand for regime change was something that a lot of journalists, a lot of social media activists, the YouTube community in Sri Lanka, they have done a tremendous job in highlighting the situation in Sri Lanka. It cannot be separated. At a point, the journalists were part of that struggle, and in Sri Lanka, journalists were representing that voice. Um, as a result, they were also at the receiving end. But the failure to govern and to commit such economic crimes as done in Sri Lanka is something that journalists should be discussing, should be raising, and also instead of the witch hunt that we witnessed in Sri Lanka, it would have been probably ideal to have some kind of attempt to be made to recover the stolen assets, to ensure there is justice and fair pay. And I go back to something that Steve said about Sri Lanka, the fact that, and also Daniel, that there are no deaths, there are no killings of journalists, but it does not mean Sri Lanka is the perfect place, or it has never been really, because we've been one of the most violent places for journalists to live in and to work in. It changes for a while, but impunity has come to stay. And a case in point is that I would like to refer to the Permanent People's Tribunal. I just want to highlight this because it did deliver a very important verdict recently um, in The Hague about, and it held the Sri Lankan government responsible for what has happened. And I refer to the murder of my former editor, Lasantha Vikramatunga. And in this inquiry, there was something that I would like to mention, and the verdict did say that his right to life, freedom of expression, and effective remedy were all denied. And when you it is not just about him, it's about all of us working in Sri Lanka, all journalists in Sri Lanka, and not working in Sri Lanka, not just in South Asia, but the rest of the world as well. Impunity is something that we as a region got to tackle, and this was an emblematic case only, that where we learn that the state can actually get to the messenger and take your life for speaking the truth. And because we also talk about media under siege, I also want to mention something that I thought would be appropriate, because this is also South Asian space. We do not have the opportunity to report on each other. Our narratives are largely constructed by different sections of the media. Sometimes it's deeply political, and listening to all of you, I felt the opportunity to report. Pakistani journalists to visit India, or Indian journalists to visit Pakistan, and to understand and report on our people, on the issues that journalists or journalists face, would not be possible. So who prevents us from having that access? Who prevents us from telling these stories is also something I think we should discuss. And that's also because when we talk about media under siege, this is also one way of controlling free speech, of stories that matter about our own understanding of our region as well. I think I wouldn't want to take a lot of time, simply because probably it's too late in Colombo. Probably we can take some questions, and I think that you might want to ask questions about Sri Lanka, rather than me offering a summary which is of my own.